Hello friends, welcome to Dwarka Education. So this one is the continuation series of the TensorFlow. In the previous session we have learned about what exactly the TensorFlow is, and let me just come back on the sessions that we are covering today, the topic that we are covering today, that is introduction to the TensorFlow and how to create tensors. So before starting this, let's understand what exactly the tensor is. So if I'm just coming on the tensor, what exactly the tensor is? Tensor is kind of numpy array that is known as tensors in TensorFlow. So if anybody will ask about the tensors, what exactly the tensor is, so we can define like this: tensors are kind of numpy array that we are using in the TensorFlow. So basically this one is the building block of the TensorFlow. If we don't know how to create the tensors, it will very difficult to be work on the TensorFlow. So let's start and understand what kind of the tensors. Tensors means what kind of the array we can create in the TensorFlow. Basically TensorFlow supports multi-dimensional numerical representation of an array. So it's kind of the n-dimensional numbers where we can define in the tensor objects. So let's understand now. We'll come and understood the difference between understand about the tensor, what exactly the tensor is. Now the question raised here, what is the difference between why we need the tensor array if we have the numpy array? So what exactly the requirement of the tensors here? So basically the tensor that we know, tensor is an n-dimensional array of numbers that is known as the tensor objects. And why we are using it? Because numpy array cannot use GPU and TPUs. There is no option to be specifying that array will be using the GPU and TPU to compute if we are computing some operations on numpy arrays. So we cannot specify whether it will be running on the GPU or TPUs. But here we can specify the tensor object. At the time of the processing, it will using the TPU. So that is the major difference, that we are using the tensor object instead of the numpy object. When we have a distributed system, at that time we will using such kind of the operations. So let's understand. Today in session we are not discussing about the theoretical topics and all. Now we are just directly straightforward and moving towards the hands-on on TensorFlow. Okay, so let's come on the TensorFlow hands-on part.